Good evening all, and welcome. I hope you're sitting comfortably, in your nice, comfy home probably. Make sure to look behind you, and ensure that no one has followed you home. You never know who might be creeping around your yard. I'm sure there's no one. But anyway, without further ado, it's time to get comfortable. Check behind you, and let the darkness take control. This happened to my Aunt Clara about 20 years ago. She was a regular at a bowling club. As you can imagine, bowling isn't a super popular sport, but attracts its own unique crowd nonetheless. She usually got a lift from her husband, and was picked up at roughly around 10. However, on this night, her husband had been called back to work for an emergency at the plant where he worked. He was pissed, but it wasn't too much trouble for my aunt, because the walk back to her house was nothing more than about 15 minutes. She thanked all the members offering her rides, and said that she would be fine, as another member took her balls and said that he would bring them next time. It's not like she could bowl when she was at her house anyway. So, she got her stuff and made her way home. And as the bowling alley was at the edge of town, it teetered off to become the sticks almost. She started her walk fairly pleasantly, and about halfway she saw someone in the distance. She thought it was a guy trying to break into the car, so instinctively decided to cross the road and pretend not to notice. She tried to ignore him as much as possible, but he had no intention of ignoring her. He immediately stopped what he was doing, and my aunt said she heard a metallic clang as something fell to the ground, and heard the man literally run across the pavement and road over to her. He got right behind her, and she could hear his breath loud as he had just run a short distance, dangerously close to her neck. She was scared and unsure if she should turn around and say something or be polite, but chose to remain oblivious. Not 3 seconds had passed when my aunt felt his hand rest gently on her shoulder. She turned around, and he was there panting, and offered her a big smile, and said, "Hello, where are you off to?" She gave her a wry smile, and said that she was just making her way to see a friend. He looked at her, and she could see this kind of crazed look in his eyes. There was something weird about his pupils, but she couldn't really tell what. He said, "Can I come too? I need a friend tonight." She didn't really know what to say. On the one hand, she could be polite and try and lose him halfway there, and on the other, she could be rude and potentially face the consequences of a pissed off guy who she didn't know, who she was pretty sure she'd just seen trying to break into a vehicle with a crowbar. So she chose to be nice and said, "Of course." The guy smiled again and put his hand on her shoulder as they started walking. The man was a fair bit bigger than my aunt, so she relented and walked the death march with this creepy guy. She was no more than 5 minutes from her house and needed to find a way to lose him. Problem being, her house was on this very road, so there was no way for her to lose him really, unless she cut off another road and went around in a circle. But then what if he didn't follow? She'd lead him right back to where she didn't want him to be. All these thoughts entered her mind as she walked ever closer to her front door. She made a tactical move and just kept on walking. The guy was starting to get bored as my aunt wasn't saying much, and kept asking how far it was and if it would be much further. She said that it was just up here, and then picked a random house with all the lights off. She said that this is where her friend lived. She was getting desperate and feeling incredibly anxious. It was only 10. She knew some people could be in bed at this time, but she wished on her lucky stars that there'd be no one home. I'm not sure why. She knocked on the door with the guy in tow, waiting to see what would happen. There was no reply. After about 2 minutes of waiting in silence, the guy goes, "Looks like there's no one home." She turns back and says, "What night is it tonight?" He says, "Thursday." And she goes, "Oh man, there's me thinking that it was Friday. I'm so sorry, my friend. Well, no harm done. Looks like we won't be going anywhere after all. I better get home now. Hope you have a good night," and started walking along. But he caught up fairly quickly, unrelenting and unprepared to leave her be. "That's all right. Why don't we chill back at your place?" That's when things got creepier. His hand started descending her shoulder and all the way down to her waist. She instinctively slapped his hand off and told him that that wasn't cool, but he then gave a very, very angry look, and she started to feel very threatened. In a moment of panic, she dropped her purse intentionally so that things would start falling out. She saw a lipstick of hers begin rolling down the sidewalk, and as she was picking things up, she looked behind her and indicated to the guy, saying, "Oh darling, would you be a dear please and pick that up for me?" He thought about it for a moment, and then turned his back for a second to retrieve the fallen article. The moment that he had reached the lipstick, my aunt was already running at full speed with her bag towards her house. She didn't dare look back, but she also didn't dare to make her way home. When she found a street corner, she turned, stopped immediately, and needed to see where the creep was. She was about to peek her eye around the corner, but that's when she realized she didn't need to. She could hear the man furiously running as fast as he could behind her, and she decided to carry it on and kept up the chase. She ran around that street and made a perfect square and looked around again, and he was just a little off. She was running out of energy and completely terrified, and saw some bushes in a neighbour's garden. She lunged into the bushes and tried as best she could to remain completely silent. There she remained, holding her hands over her mouth, eyes wide in the dark, seeing if this creep would pass her. She heard him before she saw him. He was running like there was no stopping him, fortunately completely oblivious to her hiding spot, and ran straight past. Fortunately for her, he kept on going, and didn't seem to stop running even though he didn't see her. It took her about 20 minutes before she finally had the courage to even peep out of the bushes. She didn't hear anyone, and she didn't see anything, and she started walking back quietly, always looking behind her, in case she'd need to burst into a sprint once more. She finally reached the stairs of the house and ascended them quickly. She looked around, and she said that it was at this moment that all her fears returned and that her heart dropped to her stomach. Out in the distance was the guy. He was watching, and he began running and running faster than before towards the house. As cliché as this may sound, my aunt then dropped the keys and was fumbling in her hands, shaking as she inserted them into the locks and finally ran into the door. It took the guy about 10 more seconds before he started banging on the door. My aunt just stood at the other side of the door, trembling. She didn't know what to do. She was scared that the guy would go fetch his crowbar and make quick work of the door as well. When she finally gained her composure, with the guy still banging on the door, did she run to the phone and dial 911 and explained that a creep was banging on the door, and she was pretty sure she saw him trying to break into a car earlier. The operator insisted on staying on the line and said that the police would be there soon to deal with this guy. She wasn't too far from the police station, and it only took about 3 minutes before she heard the whirl of sirens and the police approached the area. That's when the banging stopped and the guy started running. It didn't take long for the police to catch him too, and my aunt kept in touch with them to be informed of the proceedings. As it turns out, this guy had just been released from prison not 2 weeks before. And what do you know? In that time, he'd already been linked to a robbery in the area, was trying to break into a motor vehicle, and was creeping on my aunt. She was always dropped off home after bowling, or taken back home by her husband. It's always sat with me, this story, because I, as a petite young woman, fear for my safety after dark, and hope to never encounter anyone like this. Some friends and I had just got done at a New Year's party, and were being driven home by the designated driver. We're all having fun jamming to music like normal people, and we didn't notice a blue Ford Escape that had just slid in behind us and started to follow us until we were already on my street. Not thinking anything of it, the designated driver pulled into my driveway, and the blue Ford had blocked the driveway entrance, preventing us from leaving. We proceeded to calmly all freak the hell out and wonder what this guy was doing. I caught a glimpse of him while the brake lights were still on, and he was a large, heavy-set, bald guy with a large beard. We all sat there wondering what the hell he was doing or what he wanted. He turned his car off, and my friend started to reach into the back seat looking for some kind of defense weapon to go and confront this guy and see what he wanted. I guess the guy didn't realize that there were more than one person in the car, because he started his car again and drove off rather quickly. I quickly said my goodbyes to my friends and told them to be safe, and hurried into the house. I was on guard watching through the windows for an hour afterwards, watching, but he never came back. I don't know what his intentions were, but I hope we never meet again. Around 2012, I lived in the industrial part of a city, where there weren't many houses around nearby. Just warehouses, trains, and some businesses scattered around. Even during the day it was rare to see people walking around, unless it was to or from the bus stop. One night, I was feeling off, like maybe my boyfriend and I had been arguing, or my roommates were getting on my nerves, and I decided that I needed to go for a walk. It was cold and late, past midnight. I just really needed some fresh air and time alone. I was a 21-year-old girl, who at that point in life wasn't very concerned about my own safety or well-being. I wouldn't say that I thought I was invincible, but I definitely did some careless and stupid stuff, and I'm lucky to have survived. This would qualify as one of those situations. I threw on my long trench coat, combat boots, a big fuzzy hat, and took off in a rush. There wasn't anything particularly scenic or pleasant around there, so I just went into the direction I knew best, towards the liquor store about half a mile away. As I approached the store, I reached into my pocket and realized that I had forgotten my wallet and phone. This store was closed anyway, so I just kept walking, still in the light of the neon liquor signs. I heard a car approach me and press on the brakes. I slowly looked over my shoulder to see the tip of my boyfriend's 90s silver Buick LeSabre moving alongside me. Relieved, I looked to the driver's seat and see a man who is definitely not my boyfriend. He rolls down the window and says, "Get in the car." I was completely caught off guard, shocked, confused, and honestly kind of angry. "What? No," was my response, as I kept walking. He kept pace with me as I continued down the block. I kept looking over and finally told him to piss off, but he didn't do anything. He just kept right beside me, staring at me with the window down. Suddenly, he sped off, and a wave of relief washed over me. I really didn't know what to do next, so I cut around a corner and started walking in the opposite direction of the street back towards my house, towards the oncoming lane in case he came back around, which he did. He would stop and then creep forward as I walked, all the while mumbling things to me. He definitely seemed to believe that I was going to get into the car with him, because he surely was not taking no for an answer. This time at least, there was a whole lane between us, but I really had nowhere to go. If I decided to take off running towards my house, there was only one way to get there, through the deserted industrial area, following on down the road, which led into a tunnel under the train tracks. He would be able to follow me right to my front door, with no witnesses, very easily. There was a 24-hour convenience store a mile in the other direction, but was that really my best option? I felt helpless. Out of nowhere, I heard the chattering sound of people in an unmarked building beside me. Without a second thought, I frantically pushed the door and entered a scene that I will never forget. A bunch of sweaty men smiling and speaking to each other in Italian, as they cheered and finished their beers as they packed up their ping-pong paddles. They all stopped and looked at me, and I shakily exclaimed, "There's a man outside following me, and I was really scared." It was silent for a second, as they all eyed one another suspiciously, but then one guy eventually offered me a ride home. I was so thankful to be in this stranger's fancy car for a whole minute and a half. I kept apologizing and thanking him. He was just kind of like, "It's okay. Be safe. Sketchy looking girl who just busted into our weekly tournament. You weirdo. Please don't rob me." When I got home, I immediately looked up the non-emergency police line, but decided against calling, because like I said, the dude was in the exact same make, model, and colour as my boyfriend's car, who was likely to be in the same exact area shortly. Looking back, I probably should have made the call. When said boyfriend did get home, he was furious with me that I put myself in that situation. Like, sure, that was a dumb move by me, but what about this guy who was lazily trying to kidnap me? Who the hell does that? So, scary man in the silver Buick, please, let's not meet. I hope no girls met him that night, or ever. And Italian dudes, thank you so much for having your hobby right next to where and when I needed you the most. When I was about 24 or so, I worked at a hotel about a half-mile from my house. My husband and I were dirt poor at the time, so I walked to and from work. I lived in a small town in Louisiana, so things were seemingly safe typically. I had just gotten off shift at 3 p.m. and started my journey home. I had a backpack with my laptop in it slung over my shoulder. I get about halfway home, and this man comes walking up one side of the road. He looks to be about 35 or so, tall and medium build. I keep walking, but I notice he's staring at me. He begins to yell, "Hey girl," and continues to walk in my direction. At this point I'm on high alert and quicken my pace. He is coming from one of the side roads in front of me, so at this point he is standing in the way of me and my house. He begins towards me and yells again. I nod at him. He asks, "Where are you going in such a hurry, girl?" I tell him I'm going home to my husband, which is right around the corner, without giving him the actual location. He reaches out towards me and says, "Why don't you come over to my house and we can talk? Take a break from all that walking." I tell him no, and attempt to walk by him. At this point he reaches out and grabs my arm. "I told you to come back to my house and we can chat." At this point I'm in tears, yelling at him no and to not touch me. Cars are passing by and people are looking but not stopping. I jerk away from him, slam him in the face with my laptop bag, and that stunned him long enough for me to just run away. Along the way he was yelling at me, saying I was an ungrateful so-and-so, and he just wanted to chat. I got home and broke down, and lost myself. I passed by that guy's house so many times after that, and always felt such an intense fear. Every Friday, me and a group of friends would meet up at a friend's house basement to watch movies and just hang out. My house was a couple of houses down in a street that curves slightly, so from my friend's house you couldn't see my house, but it was within the same block. I was 16 at the time, and normally another friend who was making his way home would walk me back, but he didn't go this particular Friday. It was sometime around 9, and I decided to walk back home. Gave my mum a quick call before I left, and mentioned I would be heading home soon. When I left my friend's house, there was a group of guys hanging out outside. I didn't think much of it, since it was normal for people to be hanging out around this time in the area. As I make my way down a couple of houses, I feel like I'm being watched, but don't think too much about it until I'm being surrounded by a bunch of guys who look to be 18 to 21. Truthfully, I didn't know what to do, so I just kept walking and trying to get home as they said things to me, and started to get closer. At some point, I stopped scared, as they closed in on me within sight of my house. I couldn't even scream of how terrified I felt, when I heard a scream yelling for them to get away. Apparently my mum had got a feeling to look out the window, and I am so glad she did. She screamed for my dad to get out, and he did, getting between them and me. He just told me to run inside the house. The creeps ran away while grabbing a metal garbage can top and throwing it at us, landing in our car in our driveway. That dent always reminded me of how lucky I was. Back when I was 14/15, I hung around with a sizable group of friends. We would meet up in what we called the field, basically a large park in the middle of a residential area which backed onto a cemetery. On one side was an imposing hotel with large grounds, and on the other, fenced-in wastelands. We hung around towards the back of the field, which was surrounded by trees and bushes, so visibility was nil from the street. Added to that, it was very poorly lit, so we would build bonfires at night to provide light and warmth in winter. During the day, large gangs of us would come and go. We'd head to the shops or play curbs on the street. A local weirdo would often walk by, looking back over his shoulders at us every few seconds, immediately averting his gaze if eye contact was made. He would shuffle around the corner only to reappear at regular intervals. He was an absolute creep, and this was displayed in his physicality. He was short and of slim build, balding with tufts of long hair creeping down the nape of his neck. As previously described, he would walk in a shuffling motion, stopping abruptly and turning around to watch us. His eyes darted all over the place, and he never made direct eye contact. Being teenagers, and with the bravado of safety in numbers, we never really viewed him as a threat. The lads would roar at him, call him a perv, and tell him to piss off. We gave him little thought. One night around November/December, I'd arranged to meet friends in the field after dinner. Around this time of year in Ireland, it's pitch black by 4, and it was 6:15, and I was 15 minutes early. The field was dark and empty, but with the fearlessness and naivety of youth, I strolled to our usual spot at the back of the park to wait. Keep in mind, this was around 95 or 6, pre-everyone having mobile phones. We had customized our little hut into one of these bushes, complete with branches that we used as seats. I seated on one of them and lit a smoke. All was silent for several minutes, until I heard a slight rustling in one of the bushes. I was slightly concerned, but figured it was a squirrel. The rustling stopped for several moments, but picked up again louder and more vigorous. Definitely not the work of a squirrel. Alarmed, I shot up from my seated position and tried to make out the source of the noise in the dim visibility. Out of nowhere he emerged from the bush. Pounced would be more accurate, and he was mere feet away from me. He stared directly at me, with the most menacing grin I have ever witnessed to this day, and he put his finger up to his lips in a shushing gesture. I bolted, through the bushes, branches whipping at my face, and I stumbled at one point, catching myself before I fell. I ran out of that goddamn park into what felt like slow motion at the time, straight to my house about half a kilometer away. I don't know if he followed me. I didn't look back. I didn't see him again. As I later learned, he spent several years in a mental facility. The next time I heard of him, he had murdered his father, beating and eventually stabbing him to death. He was convicted of the murder and detained in a mental facility. I thought little about him in the 20 or so years since the incident, until a few months back, that he was on my bus gazing around creepily. He looked my way, but there was no recognition on his part. I really hope to not encounter him again. This happened 4 years ago. I lived in Staten Island for a few years, because I went to college there. I was about 20 years old at the time. One evening, I went to a Need for Speed screening in Manhattan, unfortunately alone because my friend bailed on me at the last minute. I love Aaron Paul and Kid Cudi, and I just had to go see it, even if it was by myself. As some of you may know, Staten Island is part of New York City, but still very far from everything, which resulted to be the longest and scariest trip of my life. When I transferred to 2-to-1 train at Chambers Street, and while waiting for one train, this weird guy approached me and asked for my name. I think his name was Chris. I lied to him and told him my name was Sophia, and kept walking away from him. He then offered me candy, which I declined. This was around 9:30 p.m. or so, and welcome to NYC. The train was taking forever. This freaked me out even more. He would ask me questions like where I'm from, which school I go to, and I lied about every single thing I said. He told me that he lived in Brooklyn, and I noticed another woman by us who kept turning around to see my situation. I decided to sit next to her and whispered to her and asked her to pretend she knew me. She told me how she was going to approach me anyway because she knew I could be in a dangerous situation. So the train comes and I decide to miss it. However, this guy Chris tapped on my shoulder and said, "Sophia, the train is here." At this moment, I got the worst goosebumps and I was sweating so much. I told him, "Thank you, but this is my friend and we're going to talk." I thanked the woman who helped me and hopped onto the next train. When I got to the ferry station, I did not feel safe or comfortable. So I, for some reason, went up to this sweet-looking couple and explained my situation, and they kindly offered that I can sit next to them on the ferry. Fortunately, they were travelling on the same bus after the ferry too. Now you'd think the story would end here, but nay. Remember how this guy Chris said that he lived in Brooklyn? As soon as I sit with the couple, I see the guy, walking back and forth by us. I informed the couple that this was the guy who was creeping on me, and I almost started crying. The couple comforted me, and the guy told me that he knows martial arts, which helped calm me down a little bit. However, this Chris guy would not stop walking by us the whole time the ferry was moving, which was about 20 to 25 minutes, although it felt as if it were 300 hours that night. The creepiest part of this situation is that when I thought we lost him while getting off the ferry, Chris walked right by me and said, "I hope to see you again, Sophia." I wanted to legit disappear off the earth at that moment, and the couple told him off and threatened to call the police on him if he didn't stay away from me. Thankfully, the couple and I got on the bus together, and they gave me their numbers to let them know that I am back in my dormitory safe, since their stop was before mine when I got to campus. I asked the security guy to drive me back to my dorm so I was home safely. I really hope to not meet him again. You gave me one of the biggest anxieties in the world. This was about a week and a bit ago. I was on the bus from a shopping mall in Australia to a bus stop to which I'd get some food from a supermarket, Coles, and then walk home from there. I was on the bus with my two friends, and we all sat on our own seats, one behind each other. My friends and I are 17. About 5 minutes into the bus ride, this athletic-looking man got on the bus. He was white, mid to late 20s, possibly early 30s, wearing a white and blue rimmed tank top, blue shorts and sneakers, and I think his hair was short and dark blonde. Anyway, people obviously got on the bus. Nothing wrong so far. So we're about halfway to my stop now. About 10 minutes after the man got on, my friend Sarah was napping and Tammy was reading for English, and I was listening to music. The athletic man looked back at us, pretty sure that he was looking at Tammy at first. My friends and I sat on the left side of the bus, with the man sitting on the right side, probably about 3 to 4 seats in front of us. So I assumed that he thought Tammy was cute. But then I thought, wait, what the hell? She's 17, looks 17, and the man is about 30. The man stopped looking at Tammy, and then a minute later he looked back at Tammy again, just staring at her for a minute. Tammy and Sarah didn't notice. I looked back at the man who made eye contact with me, and then stopped looking at Tammy. At this point I was suspicious, but I didn't say anything. Then he stared back at Tammy for a third time, this time for even longer. I glared at him because, hey, staring is creepy. To which he made eye contact with me again, and then stopped looking. I texted Tammy and was like, "Hey, my bus stop is soon, maybe 10 to 15 minutes away. Just so you know, the creepy dude is staring at you. Be careful, in case he's still on the bus when I leave. Just so you're aware, I'm a guy, and Tammy and Sarah are both obviously girls." Tammy acknowledges my text, and nodded at me, and cringed. So anyway, Tammy went back to reading, and I was listening to music. The man turned around and started staring at me this time, not Tammy. His eyes, I saw, were directly looking at me. I tried to avoid eye contact as he turned back around. He kept turning back around and staring at me for a total of 7 times, for about a minute each, excluding the times he stared at Tammy. Each time he stared at me, he kept pressing the bus stop button to indicate to the bus driver that it was your stop. And he'd look at me, and he looked like he was about to keep pressing it as he stared at me. I told Tammy again to be careful, as this dude was still staring. So as the dude was staring at me still, I realized the next stop was mine, so I pressed the button. The bus stopped, and I got up and was getting off the bus as athletic dude got off behind me. He went in the opposite direction, but I turned around to quickly see what he was doing, just in case. He was walking down the footpath as I crossed. He turned around and saw me crossing, and consequently quickly crossed the road, paralleling me. I took note and went to Coles to get some Pepsi Max. I walked into Coles and realized that the man from the bus stop was also going into Coles, but he was literally matching my footsteps, speed, and movement. Every time I moved my left foot, he would too. He was staring at me as I walked in, and I sped walked into the aisle to get my Pepsi Max and looked around to see if he was there. I couldn't see him. I walked into the self-service counter and was paying for my Pepsi Max. As he walked past, self-served slowly while staring at me, giving me the most evil glare I have ever seen. I quickly walked out and tried to see if he was following me. He was. He was speed walking to catch up with me and didn't even buy anything. Needless to say, I ran home as fast as I could for 10 minutes straight. He was no longer behind me, and I lost him. I have no idea where he went, and I haven't seen him since. This took place 7 years ago. I was 21 and usually more street savvy than this, but was coming off the back of a bad relationship and was going through somewhat of a messy phase. This particular night, I'd made 2 errors. The first was I'd gone out with people I'd class as acquaintances rather than friends, and the second was that I had too much to drink. This meant that the people I was with just left, long before I did. Having had way more to drink than I usually would have, I can't really remember how I ended up alone at the end of the night. All I remember is it being some time around 4 or 5 a.m. I was outside of the closed nightclub in the centre of town, and it was cold and completely deserted. Not a single soul around. I was out of money and had left my bank card at home, so no way of getting a taxi. And even if I'd have had the money, there was not a single one in sight. I couldn't call for one, as the taxi place was shut by this time, so I was trying to call my friends to find out where they were, not paying as much attention to my surroundings as I should have, and seemingly out of nowhere, a man appeared. He startled me as he appeared from nowhere, and immediately struck up a conversation. Whilst he wasn't saying anything overtly threatening, the way he was so familiar with me seemed off. I was clearly drunk, alone, and pretty vulnerable, whereas he didn't seem remotely intoxicated, and was too comfortable. He was asking my name, and I was stumbling over my words. And when I didn't tell him, he said, "Here, why don't you add me on Facebook?" Took my phone out of my hands and added himself using my Facebook app, and then he had my name. I kept saying I had to go and that I needed to get home, but he wouldn't let me leave. I was pretty freaked out at this point and sizing up the situation. There was no one around that I could go to for help. He was well over 6 feet in comparison to my 5'2", and he'd easily catch and overpower me on a good day, so there was no chance of running now while I was drunk, and wearing sky-high heels. But something told me to keep it calm and friendly. His friendliness seemed false, and like he would turn nasty at any given moment. He kept me talking for what seemed like forever, and I kept calm while still reiterating that I needed to get home. And then somehow I managed to just walk off. I can't remember the moments before. He may have been distracted by a phone call or just allowed me to go. All I can remember thinking as soon as I'd walked calmly around the corner and out of sight was run. So I did, as fast as I could, in spite of my stupid heels, which I kicked off halfway down the hill. I'd start crying at some point, and I was so focused on getting away, I didn't notice the two people until I ran straight into them. They immediately asked what the matter was, and I was clearly terrified, and one of them stayed with me while the other double-checked to make sure the creepy guy had really gone. Then they gave me a drink and a jacket as I was shivering and walked me the rest of the way home. I finally managed to get through to my friend who met me at my place, so I wasn't alone for the rest of the night. To this day I don't know what he may or may not have been planning. If it was something really bad, then he didn't really think it through enough, and I had his full name and details from when he added himself on Facebook with my phone, which I immediately removed and blocked when I got home. Maybe he was just hoping to get lucky, and gave up when he realized I wasn't interested. Either way, it was really intimidating, and I've never walked home alone since. It was at one of the more western sides of the Orange Line, maybe East Falls Church. One of the metro exits puts you right up into the parking lot, whereas they put a long guardrail and bushes to keep you from the very nearest corner of the parking lot. I had parked in that area, I think, and I'd been close to the metro station entrance. When I came back out of the station and had to walk out of the thick bush line, the corner of the lot looked pretty remote and barely lit. I decided to walk perpendicular to those bushes, deeper out into the lot, and then J-turn towards my car. I had spotted two guys hanging around in my travel line that I moved away from and walked on by. They forgot about me and moved towards my car in that dark corner. My car, in fact, a flashy black 300ZX. When I turned the curve position of the J, I saw them. They saw me, and they realized I had spotted them. So they milled around a second time to make an excuse to go back to the center of the lot. I hopped into my car and fired it up, and drove out. The next person to go into the back area, immediately as I was driving out of the lot, they robbed and killed. I got the sick shivers after that. I got back to Reston and heard that on the news. Note, they changed that section a lot and did away with the bushes at the exit after the event. I have a joking phrase I made up for my own daughter, or anyone else. You see what you saw. If someone looks strange or potentially dangerous, it is. Take immediate action to get away from it, like making a J-turn and observing. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed the video. I just want to give a shout out to myself and my PO box. Feel free to send me anything you like. The reason I'm actually mentioning this is because some of you lovely guys have actually sent me stuff, and I've started to record myself and my reaction opening the things you send me. I wanted to originally put it as YouTube stories, but they are obscenely short. So I have put a link in the secret message section, which I know very few of you even know about, but it's at the bottom of the text part of the video. And there I'm going to be doing just opening what you guys send me, really, so you can see how I react to that, especially if you're the person that sent it. I thought you'd probably be interested to see what I thought of it. Anyway, so that's what I've done. All the videos are going to be unlisted, so that you'll never find them unless you have that exact link. I'll probably make it a playlist or something so that you can see others if you want to. But anyway, if you enjoyed the video, please do not forget to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. That always helps. And why don't we try and get this video to 1,000 likes as well? That would be amazing. Something else that would be pretty cool is if you're new here, why not subscribe? Press the little bell icon. I do post every night, and that way you'll be guaranteed to be notified of your nightly spooks. If there's a story that you would like to share, feel free to send it to my email or drop it into my Reddit. Either are fine, but just be sure to include lots of paragraphing, detail, and punctuation, as that helps set the story and make it a bit more dynamic. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.